I'm Frederick County Executive Jan Gardner, and you're listening to Conduit Street Podcast, the official podcast of the Maryland Association of Counties.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, we're recording remotely today. How's everything going with you? A lot going on in Annapolis and a lot to get through today.
Yeah, lively time, no surprise. Had a chance to be in the office earlier in the week, working remotely from home today, but glad to be back in the loop for the pod.
And I'm excited, and I know, Michael, you're excited, and I know our guest is excited. Dominic Butchko, new to MACo. He is on the policy team. We've heard from Brianna and DePaul on recent episodes. Dominic is making his debut today. Dominic, welcome. Tell us a little about yourself and the portfolio that you're covering with MACo.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm very exciting that you saved the best for last. Happy to finally be on. A little bit about myself. I come from the great state of Pennsylvania, also working remotely today from there. My portfolio, I cover environmental issues, information technology, parks and recreation, planning and zoning, and public works and transportation. So if anyone wants information from MACo on those topics, feel free to reach out.
We have you on, Dom, because we have stuff that's right up your alley today. And last week, for our loyal listeners, you'll remember that we unveiled MACo's 2022 legislative initiatives, and we promised that we'd cover each of them more in depth in the weeks ahead. So just as a reminder, we are prioritizing infrastructure, elections, defending local officials against threats and intimidations, and ensuring that first responders have the resources that they need to continue delivering the life-saving care that they deliver each and every day. Today, we're going to focus on two of those initiatives, the deep dives, if you will, reinvesting in local transportation infrastructure and resetting emergency transport as a realistic recognition of care. And speaking of infrastructure, we're going to also talk about what's going on or not going on with the big infrastructure bill pending before Congress. So with that, that's the setup. That's what we're going to do today. And I want to start with the EMT reimbursement initiative. So this is about updating our EMS reimbursement model to account for what I would say is reality, right? And Dom, you're the lead on this issue. Fire and EMS is a big part of what counties do, but what are we talking about here when we say EMS reimbursements?
So we're all familiar with our ambulances and wonderful EMTs. If you have an issue and make a phone call, you expect someone to show up there and take you to where you need to go. But one thing that COVID has showed us is that our healthcare system isn't always perfect and that it needs to change. Traditionally, EMTs show up and take you to a hospital, but today they are performing so many other life-saving things. You have on-site care, taking you to urgent cares, and there's just a lot of interesting things going on in this space.
Yeah, I feel like for our regular listeners, they know that we get enthusiastic when there's sort of a change on the ground and policy needs to catch up. And sometimes that's been technology is moving more rapidly than public policy. In this case, a little bit of technology, but it's just sort of the realities of delivering healthcare are just different. The contours are different today than 20 or 40 or 60 years ago. And to the extent that we still have a model that's built on 1980, it's lacking in a lot of ways. And that's in general, like broad brush, that's what we're trying to get at is we count on emergency medical technicians and the vehicles and so forth as a meaningful part of healthcare. So let's recognize that, acknowledge it, and get it folded into the healthcare system properly, including how do you support those things?
Yeah, and just to build off of that, the way the current model works is EMTs take you to hospitals, and the simple answer is hospitals can't handle all the calls. The capacity just isn't there. So we have to build a new model for the 21st century.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also, Dom, you mentioned hospitals and maybe they cannot handle, all of these loads of patients, but also, one of my favorite issues, 911, I think the goal here and a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about is to reduce the reliance on 911, right? To make sure that we're not setting frequent flyers up, if you will. We know that a lot of times you have the same people dialing 911, and we know where they are, we know who they are. And so we want to sometimes make sure that we're being proactive and take care of that before it happens. So this is also about reducing 911 calls that are coming into our 911 call centers. And like you said, keeping people that maybe don't need to be in the hospital out of the hospital, and they can, provide them care in some other way that doesn't necessarily require a hospital visit.
A centerpiece of what we're getting at and why the counties are concerned about this is as there's this evolution of how care is delivered. And Dom, you already hit these points that we're helping people on site, or we're taking them to the nearest place that can tend to their not super high level emergency needs. That's a sensible thing to do, but Maryland law right now doesn't really recognize that kind of service as being healthcare, and it's not the kind of thing that you can bill an insurance company or Medicaid for. And without that component of what's basically a fee-for-service model, you end up with these, the volunteer fire companies or the career companies that are supported directly by counties, they end up not able to compensate for that care, and that's a big hole in the boat.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I think is really interesting, so you talked about treating on site and maybe taking somebody to an urgent care because that's the closest available treatment center, or somebody doesn't need to go to a hospital, so they could just go to urgent care and get an x-ray or something. But also, Dom, I want to talk about mobile integrated health. Now, that's a fancy term, but essentially what we're talking about here is providing services outside of the hospital. So whether it be in a patient's home or in a mobile environment, this is what I was talking about earlier when I'm saying that, we want to take these proactive ideas and put them into practice. But unfortunately, like Michael and you mentioned, Dom, you're not able to recover costs if you don't actually drop somebody off at a hospital. So all of these, forward-thinking ideas about being proactive and getting out there into the community and providing these preventative services, they're great. But the law as it is right now sort of disincentivizes doing that stuff, right? And Dom, I know you and I were talking about Anne Arundel County. They just touted their program. So talk a little bit about what they're doing. And this is not just in Anne Arundel, there are a number of counties, but what have they seen with their program and what they've done? How has it impacted Anne Arundel County and the community?
Yeah, so first, overall, there are 12 counties in the state of Maryland in some form of testing for a mobile integrated health program. And a lot of issues with that are costs are hard to estimate, and it's a lot of individualized care that has to be factored in there. Anne Arundel County, though, has had tremendous success recently. Their program is called the Mobile Integrated Community Health Program, or MICH, M-I-C-H, and they have seen dramatic results. They decreased 911 utilization by almost 70% within 3 months of the program being launched. And that's with 203 patients being served through that time. So really a 70% drop in 3 months is pretty successful, I would say.
And I think this model of the idea of mobile integrated healthcare, as I understand it, is basically bring health services to the community or to a neighborhood or to a facility, right? And basically say, we're worried that not enough people are getting their regular checkups or getting their screenings or things that we just need an interaction with healthcare professionals to do. But if we go to the place where you work, or if we're right down the block and you can just walk in, you don't need to schedule an appointment 3 weeks in advance, all those, those sort of low-level barriers that sometimes keep people out. Bring healthcare to the people, and you can target areas that are being underserved, that don't have enough providers or don't have enough pickup from what you can tell from community statistics. I mean, this is a way to promote health equity, which is a concern for a lot of our counties, as well as the overall efficiency of our system. But let's reach people that we're not reaching through the old ways.
Yeah, it is all about bringing healthcare to the people, whether that's in their home or through innovative mobile services. And this is really hot all over the country. I mean, NIH has written about it. So it's the future of healthcare.
Right. And here's this conundrum then, that this sounds like a really smart and forward-thinking sort of thing to do. And how could you not be behind this idea of let's bring healthcare to the people, let's get more people access to screenings and things like that? Okay, sounds really good. But unfortunately, the financial side of our healthcare system doesn't recognize these interactions in the same way as a scheduled visit to a doctor's office where they fill out that form in triplicate and here are the 9 different codes and we bill your insurance company for A and B and C and D and so forth. Like, we're all familiar with that as the back end of healthcare, but we don't have the same application to these mobile deliveries. And that's where Maryland's not alone in this, but I think public policy has to catch up with the way healthcare looks for the next 20 years. Is just not going to be like the last 50.
I think that's a really interesting point. And actually, I want to talk about some of those reimbursement scenarios that are currently in law right now. For example, if you go to the hospital, the EMS service will get $100 for that. But that is from a law in 1999. So just back of the envelope math here for inflation, that's the equivalent of $160 today. Now, not even with inflation, healthcare costs have gone up. So you're not even reimbursing fully for what that service is. And it's only for the ride. It's not for other healthcare services that were provided. So if you need Narcan, if you need something else, and you're being treated to the hospital, you're only getting reimbursed for that ride, not the other services.
So this is where we're wholly out of step. That the rescue company can get what amounts to obviously a partial reimbursement at best. That the $100 doesn't pay for all the equipment and the professional staff that are required to get you physically to the hospital. But there's something you can bill Medicaid or you can bill private insurance. We don't pursue individuals for the $100. But you can send a bill for that specific service, but that's where it ends. And all this other stuff isn't included in the Maryland law. So that's the missing piece, right?
Right. Now, there is hope, though. So the good news is there are federal programs right now that are looking to change the share of the federal reimbursement to try to get that number up from $100. That's just not hitting it. Unfortunately, with these programs, though, non-governmental EMS services such as volunteers are not eligible. So they are only government EMS services that can participate in these pilots. Baltimore City is currently going to get $33 million from these federal pilots. Prince George's County is on track to get $6 million, and Anne Arundel County, who we recently said had success, is on track to get just under $3 million.
So we've got some allies and some interest at the federal level that gives us some assurance that we're not alone in being concerned about this issue, but it's kind of piecemeal. It's like, let's target this through one federal program as opposed to the sort of blanket approach to let's bring all this kind of care under the umbrella of recognize it as medical care and bill for it appropriately, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Dom, a lot of our counties, majority, rely on volunteers to provide these services. And more you're seeing EMTs being paid because that's just, again, the model that we're shifting to. But, there's a huge hole in these federal pilots, right, is that it's only if the county is actually doing it, and these are paid EMS and they're working for the county. It doesn't count if you're a volunteer company. So a lot of folks are not eligible to participate in these programs. So I think while that's good, it's sort of short-sighted, especially in a state where we do rely on a lot of volunteers. Obviously, we have some gaps to fill there. And so we're looking at this as an initiative. We want to fix this. We've talked about the challenges there with the reimbursement models, and we've seen bills in the past few years, and all of them, they chip away at this issue. But maybe it's time that, I think Michael mentioned, like a comprehensive fix, and hopefully, that could be done at the federal level too, but we shouldn't hold our breath. So here in Maryland, I think maybe it is time to take a swing at a more comprehensive fix. I mean, is that the idea here? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, that is exactly what you guys are paying me for, and why we have this legislative initiative coming up. Our goal is to really make this healthcare, as far as EMS works, and make it workable.
I think this is a really worthy issue, and we have a lot of interest from our county governments. They're concerned about support for emergency services generally, and this is a meaningful part of how that is supposed to work ideally. So I think we're on the right track with this idea. It's not a tiny lift. I mean, you dropped a few numbers for some larger jurisdictions, but that's just a piece of this puzzle. So, this isn't just let's, dot an I and cross a T, and it's a simple effort, but it's the right thing to do. And people need this kind of care. We need the resources to provide it.
And Michael, let me finish with this because I've gotten this question before. So the easy question here is, you don't send me a bill when you put out a fire at my house, right? So why would you send a bill if the ambulance picks me up and doesn't take me to the hospital, or you're providing some care on site? What's the difference? And I know that people are going to be thinking of that. So explain to us why the rationale here and why that's not as easy as comparing this to like a fire.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable place to start. And I was working with the counties back when Maryland first adopted the laws to say that you can send a bill for the delivery to a hospital. And that was, years, a couple decades ago that the ball got rolling there. But I think the best all-purpose answer is, like, there's a difference between putting out fires. That is the purest public service there is, really. I mean, everybody in the community agrees you just put out fires for everybody, period, and we pay for that in the aggregate through taxes and whatnot. For better or for worse, in the United States, medical services are largely a fee-for-service transactional service. So you deliver health care at a hospital or at an urgent care facility or at any number of other different places. Some licensed provider provides you health care, somebody who's got training and helps you in a jam, then either you pay, or in most people's cases, it ends up being an insurance company or Medicare or Medicaid ends up paying for that service sort of as a transaction. We know that's a little bit complicated. It's a little bit on the back end, but that's how America supports healthcare. So the notion that these providers who have extensive training and expensive equipment on those emergency vehicles, they're there to stabilize and monitor you on the way to that facility, wherever it is, or to help you in your living room, they are delivering healthcare. It's a different thing than the broad public service of patching a pothole or putting out a fire. You receive the benefit. We send a bill to your insurance company or to the government insurance program that supports you, and they recognize that as care. If you write the laws correctly, we'll recognize that as care. You pay the folks who provided it and help offset those costs. That's all we're trying to do.
Yep, and I think it's important to emphasize that we are not talking about sending individuals bills. This would be insurance or government aid programs, Medicaid, Medicare, but we're not looking to send an individual a bill and ask them to pay for a ride to the hospital. Some states do that, but that's not something we're looking to do here in Maryland.
Right, so we're not looking to change that model. In Maryland, this is about a responsibility of an insurer to support those costs. Yep.
All right, so bottom line here, we need to fix this. We need to get with the times and properly recognize everything that you just said and the reality of providing that care in today's world. So we went through the EMS initiative. Let's go on to infrastructure while we have Dom with us too. Dom, you mentioned transportation is also your thing. So we're going to get through two initiatives today. And this is the MACo Infrastructure Initiative. This is nothing new. Our loyal listeners will have heard the term highway user revenues before, but let's start with the basics, right? So in Maryland, local governments own and maintain 5 out of 6 road miles across the state. That's a rough estimate, but that's a lot, right? So the vast majority of the roads, local governments own and maintain them. And those roads need maintenance, right? We're talking roadway resurfacing, filling potholes, et cetera. So Michael and Dom, this initiative is all about restoring the state levied transportation revenues that we need to support safety and maintenance work on local roads and bridges across the state. And this is not a new idea. There's a lot of history here. And this is not just county governments, right, Michael? This is also a top priority for municipal governments. And so talk about a little bit, the history of roadway funding in Maryland and what has gone on that's got us to this point where, for the past several years, this has been on MACo's list a bunch of times.
Well, I'm happy to give a little bit of that, and you're right. This is something where we're on the same sheet of music as our sister organization, the Maryland Municipal League. They represent the cities and towns, their elected leaders, and this is a really high priority for them year after year. This is an issue that's more than a decade old. We're now, about 12 years deep in a weird, I don't know how to say this, like a weird sideways experiment in intergovernmental financing. And what I mean by that was, I don't think anybody had it in for local roads and bridges. In 2009, when the American economy was in great distress, and as a result, government revenues were in great distress, and the ability of the state of Maryland to meet payroll and balance its own budget was in great distress. Among the 6th or 7th or 8th round of cost containment and budget cutting and so forth that the state had to go through in 2008 and 2009, they eventually got to, we need some cash. We're going to redirect money that otherwise would have gone to local governments for their transportation needs, and instead we just need it for the state general fund to keep the place afloat.
And Michael, that's not uncommon though, right? I mean, and the idea there is, look, we need to divert, but we're not, this is not going to be permanent. So that's not something that's unusual in tough times. The state will say, look, we got to do this. You get it. We all understand, but it's not supposed to be, a permanent thing. So it's not an uncommon thing what happened back then in the depths of the Great Recession.
Right. That was the big quirk. And it was amazing to see it unfold over the course of a couple of years, because the first hatchet dropped at the Board of Public Works. Our loyal listeners will know that we've talked about the Board of Public Works before. That's the 3-member body that can make budget adjustments year round. They approve contracts. They do a number of other fiscal stewardship and oversight duties. But among their responsibilities is they can cut the current year's budget without reconvening the General Assembly to do so. So they have the ability to do that. Governor O'Malley at the time asked them to do so in August of 2009. We're literally just weeks into a new fiscal year, and suddenly all that road money you were counting on, we can't do it. We're just too upside down. What happened, though, is in the subsequent legislative actions, when they were reconciling their own budget, this ended up becoming, we're going to reset the whole formula at this new level. And local governments have been inching our way back towards reasonable funding, but we're still on what amounts to a starvation diet. It's unbelievable.
So Dom, I know you've been digging into this, and Michael set it up there, but what was the bottom line? I mean, from what happened, back in the recession, what exactly happened in terms of dollar figures when those cuts were made? What did it mean for the 23 counties and then Baltimore City as well?
So nearly $300 million in 2007 was what the counties were receiving. And that went down to $40 million in 2018. So an 87% cut in funding it's just insane. Baltimore City alone nearly received $100 million less than it did because of these cuts.
Yeah. It's just the numbers are relatively staggering. And this is one of these issues where if you take a short step back, what we're talking about is the counties and cities across Maryland, they don't have any way to fund their own roads, right? There is no county or city level gas tax. There's no add-on when you get your license plate. They don't send back $50 to your home county like some states do. There's no way that the counties generate their own transportation revenues. The system for Maryland for decades was built on the state's going to raise the money and then distribute it by a formula based on where are the roads and where are the cars. And that worked great for a long time up until 2009, when suddenly things were tough. And instead of this being done for a couple difficult years, hey, everybody put off your road maintenance for a year or two, we'll get back on track later. We just never got back on track.
Oh, just to piggyback off that for a second, I mean, that money has to come from somewhere. And the counties in Maryland provide a ton of public services. So these cuts impact more than just infrastructure and roads, which are vitally important. I mean, we were just talking about EMS. Imagine what we can do with an extra $300 million across the state.
So when I say this is nominally we're talking about transportation funding, but it's really like intergovernmental finance Maryland has put itself on this weird island where there are some places that say, go ahead, do a local gas tax and pay for your roads. And that's a model that Maryland's never pursued, but some places do that. Most places do more or less what Maryland has done, for a long time until this big cut, and said the state will raise the revenue and then we'll support your local needs because you maintain a bunch of the roads. Some places the state just maintains virtually all the roads and bridges. So there are mixed bags, but Maryland, I don't know that there's another state in the country that basically says, take care of all the roads and bridges. You get the overwhelming share of those road miles are yours to maintain, but there's a relative pittance that comes from the state transportation revenues that's there to satisfy that. So you end up with the counties saying, we have to take money from our property tax and use it to pave roads, and we can't allow everything to be unsafe. So like Dom said, that it eclipses our ability to do right by other public services. So it's a complicated and really tricky issue.
So we threw around some big figures there, and Dom, you're exactly right. The money has to come from somewhere. And, Michael, I want to get back. You were there in 2009 when all of this happened. And from what I understand and from what we've seen, most of the cuts have been either fully restored or at least partially restored. So it wasn't just transportation that got cut, right? There were a lot of things that the state had to cut. You said that, transportation cuts came in later rounds, but most of the cuts now have been restored or substantially restored, but it's not the case with highway user, right? And that's why we're still talking about this. That's why our sister association, the Municipal League, is still talking about this. We know, Michael, there was a lockbox, right? That we heard about that. We've heard about that now most recently with school funding. But if you go back to, I think, around 2013 or so, there was a transportation lockbox. So what about that? I mean, how did that play into, you would think that sounds like we're going to take all this money, we're going to make sure it only goes to transportation, and that would flow down to the locals. I mean, is that not the case? Is that the lockbox did not help with what we're talking about here, getting those dollars back to the counties and the municipalities who, again, maintain the lion's share of roads in Maryland?
So the sort of the narrator voice would jump into this conversation and say, no, that did not solve the problem. What basically happened was in the midst of an effort to get Marylanders behind an increase in transportation revenues, we bumped up the state gas tax and the way it's calculated each year and so forth, and did some other transportation funding things back in 2013, I want to say. Back when that happened, one of the components of that effort was, let's put on the ballot this statutory and constitutional provision to say transportation revenues can only go for transportation purposes. So what that lockbox effectively accomplished was there's a very extraordinary process Maryland would have to follow now if they wanted to take money out of transportation and use it for the state's general fund for non-transportation purposes. It's an emergency declaration and some specific findings of fiscal stress. You can't just do it because you feel like having another $100 million in the general fund. That's what that constitutional provision required. But we're really talking here is, among the transportation uses of these state funds, how much of it is for the state's own infrastructure, for highways and for transit and things that the state funds itself, versus how much is allocated through either capital grants or through this formal highway user revenue formula that go back to local governments for their roads and bridges. So as long as it's not non-transportation, it doesn't run afoul of the lockbox. It didn't help our problem.
Okay, so the lockbox did not help provide the funds to those that actually, own and maintain the roads. Okay, got that. But a few years ago, we did make some progress, right, Michael? The state approved a multi-year advance in local funding, but that is going to sunset in 2024, I believe in 23 actually, and in 24, local governments are going to face a cliff effect, a dramatic cliff effect, a drop in state funding. So that multi-year plan is good. It didn't get us all the way back, nowhere close, but it was a step in the right direction. But that all goes away. So we face now this dramatic cliff effect in state funding. And again, that's not very far off, right? So I guess it is time to come back along with the MML, the Municipal League, to say, look, we know we got this multi-year deal, and that's good. It was a step in the right direction, but time is running out on that, and we have a problem that is looming.
I think that's right. And also there's reason for optimism because of that framework, because we shop this around, right? When local government leaders, when our elected officials, or when we as the staff from the association or our counterparts from the municipal league, when we talk to senators and delegates or the budget secretary or the transportation secretary, literally everybody has sympathy, right? Everybody hears the quick narrative of, can you believe what, my county used to get this much, and now we get like 18 cents on the dollar of what it used to be, and we've been limping like that for a decade, and that's weird. Like, nobody comes away feeling like, well, that's what I wanted, because I love potholes. I don't want to see roads get maintained. Like, nobody feels that way. This wasn't like a political decision to say transportation's not a priority. It was just sort of a vagary of difficult decisions in difficult times. A few years ago, when we got bumped up to a higher level of funding, like you just described, there were it was a bipartisan coalition of legislators who wanted to get that done. They said, let's not do this for just 1 year. Let's do it for 5 years. So our towns and our counties can plan on things, so they can, we'll give them a commitment, right? So that was a good idea. 5 years of increased funding. Cool. We support it. We were all behind it. We're getting to the end of that 5-year window. It's time to rally the troops together, to remind everybody of this story that is not completed, and hopefully, not just wipe out that cliff effect, but let's build the next steps from here.
This is not a partisan issue. I've never seen a pothole that is a Republican or a Democrat. That potholes are nonpartisan. Everybody hates hitting them on the roads.
People really care about infrastructure, right?
They do. And unfortunately, you would think everybody does. And in Washington, I'm not a big fan of DC politics, and we all know that they move slowly and they haven't been able to get much done. But as you just said, everybody cares about infrastructure. Everybody jumps up and down. It's great. We want to make sure we fund our bridges and make sure that they're structurally sound. And we want to do all these things with ports and airports, and all of that's great. Infrastructure is also broadband. So remember, all of these things that everybody agrees are really, really important. In DC, they've had this bill, right? This giant infrastructure bill. And Michael, I know, over the past few years, Infrastructure Week hasn't really meant anything. It used to mean something, but we would always see that and sort of chuckle like, oh yeah, it would be great if Congress would do something and actually pass an infrastructure bill that we desperately need, but it's not going to happen. Now, I have been lured in to believing that Congress is going to pass this big infrastructure bill that is currently pending. And I'm still
breaking news right here. Is this like a big? Oh, I like it.
Stop the presses.
This is not me. This is not me. But
you're not calling your shot. You're not doing like the Babe Ruth call your shot here.
No, because I've been wrong so many times over the past months. That they're going to do it. They're going to do it. I've fallen into the trap. But it is important to remember at this point, the U.S. Senate has passed this bill. And the House, where it's pending now, all that's left is a simple up or down vote. The debate is finished. They just need to bring it to the floor for a vote. But of course, things are complicated. And you can beat me up on this, but I'm still really optimistic that this is going to get done sooner than later. And this would really change the game, right? This would mean a big, big, big investment in the nation's infrastructure. And of course, a big chunk of that would come here to Maryland. So where are we? Things are complicated down there, but what do you both think? I mean, you're watching this closely too. Am I an idiot? Am I on an island here to think that this is actually something that could happen, or should I just go back to being my jaded self and think it's never going to happen?
So I think that if I were to put money on it, and I'm not, by this time next week, I'm going to say we are going to have an infrastructure bill, and here is why. We had an election this week. It did not bode well for the Democratic Party. I do believe that they'll say, hey, we actually have to get something done, because what's coming around the horizon in 2022, that's not looking very good for us. So I am hopeful that the events of this week will kick Congress into gear, and that, Kevin, you will finally be right. And just remember when he is, everyone who's listening, you heard it here first, several weeks in advance.
All right. Well, so if we can get Michael on board, then we're in really good shape, because he's probably worse than me with his enthusiasm for what Congress is able to do, or most of the time not do.
Well, we know that this bill on its surface is very popular with the voting public. And if you explain at the 5-sentence level what this big legislation would do, that the majority of both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House are behind it. We know this has turned into a big, multiple legislative item package. And for the House to come up with their part, and then the Senate has to do their part, is a number of moving targets. And this is higher order math than I'm ready to engage in. All I know is those of us who have been betting on Washington to be unable to come through continue to cash week after week on the suckers like you who figure that. So
yeah, Michael is just cashing in just buckets full of money. You're not going to be able to come on the podcast anymore because you're not going to need the podcast, right? All this ad revenue that we make from purple mattresses and stuff does not compare.
I think the realistic thing here is that you have competing priorities, but we know this is among them. So whether it's a result of a big compromise of these big moving parts, or at some other point an infrastructure initiative moves on its own, there are an awful lot of players in and around Washington, and state and local governments very much among them, who believe that this is a deliverable that's important to Americans during this term of the Congress. So that is a North Star, and political North Stars are important in the process, independent of what's happening today and tomorrow.
Yes. And so in all seriousness, this is $1 trillion that is badly needed to invest in our nation's infrastructure. And we need to give a shout out to, of course, the National Association of Counties. Like always, they are on top of this. They are working this. And so there are a lot of groups along with NACo in DC trying to make sure that this happens. But again, politics are in play, but I'm still optimistic. A lot of moving parts here, more to come on MACo's infrastructure initiative, but this is important and we need to get it right. So we're going to be advancing that issue. We're going to be advancing our reimbursement models for emergency medical technicians. And then, of course, in the coming weeks, we will go into each of our other 2 initiatives more in depth. But Michael and Dom, thank you so much for this today. And any closing thoughts from you, Dominic? Anything on your first experience on the podcast?
I just have to thank both of you because for me personally, it's been a surreal experience. I remember when I moved to Maryland and I'm still trying to, learn about politics, and I would use this podcast to really familiarize myself and educate myself. And it's so surreal that I'm here now. It's just come full circle. So just warm and fuzzies, and thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening.
All right, Michael, any closing thoughts from you before we let Dom out of here?
Good show. One thing that I'm really happy about with the slate of initiatives that our association is taking up and bringing to the legislature this year is this is front and center what local governments are all about. So being there in your time of need and being able to support those services, we want to do what we can to bring those laws up to speed. On the infrastructure and those roads that get you home and they get your kids to school, we want to make sure that's taken care of and we have the answer to go in the right direction. These are the things that local governments are supposed to be delivering, and our association representing them, that's what should be at the top of our list. I'm glad they are.
Hear, hear. And so we'll leave it there for this week. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, the Conduit Street blog. But for Dominic Butchko and Michael Sanderson, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.